The laughter in the ballroom silenced instantly as the words echoed across the hall, "Solve this problem, and you'll get $500 million." In the center of the lavish atrium, amidst the wealthy elite and influential professors, stood Emily Thompson, nothing more than a janitor with a mop in hand. The spotlight fell on her, making her the target of a cruel challenge by Victor Orloff, the billionaire CEO who had orchestrated the event. His eyes gleamed as he looked down at her, his voice dripping with contempt. "You clean floors for a living. Surely you can clean up this little mess I've got here. Solve it, and you'll be richer than all of us combined," he sneered, pointing to the complex equations flashing on the screen behind him. Emily's heart raced, the weight of years of hardship pressing down on her shoulders. The crowd's laughter stung like 1,000 needles. Yet beneath the layers of ridicule, something inside her ignited, a spark of the woman she used to be before life broke her down. Without a moment's hesitation, she lifted her chin. "I accept." The room went still. In the sea of mocking faces, one question lingered in the air. Could a janitor, an invisible woman, solve what the brightest minds had failed to crack? The room fell into an uneasy silence, as though time itself had paused to witness what Emily Thompson had just done. The challenge, so carelessly thrown out by Victor Orloff, had been accepted by someone who should have had no business stepping forward. A janitor. The laughter that had echoed just moments ago was now replaced with an uncomfortable hush. Emily stood still, the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her. The years of cleaning floors, the exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones, the quiet nights spent dreaming of a life she would never get, these memories rushed to the surface. But more than the past, it was the present that gripped her now. She had just accepted an impossible challenge, one that could either break her or redefine her. The giant screen before her displayed the problem, complex equations that twisted and turned in ways she could barely comprehend. It was a fortress of numbers, a puzzle so intricate that no one in the room believed it could be solved. Not even the brightest minds in the room, those who had dedicated their lives to solving problems like this, could crack it. Victor Orloff's smirk deepened as he watched her approach the lectern. He leaned casually against the podium, his arrogance a palpable force. "Well then," he said, his voice thick with disdain, "let's see what the cleaning woman can do." The crowd chuckled softly, their eyes gleaming with anticipation, expecting nothing less than failure. Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she gripped the edges of the lectern, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. It was the same feeling she had when she first entered the university years ago, filled with the hope and drive to make a name for herself in the world of mathematics. She glanced at the problem once more. It didn't seem like much at first, just a jumble of numbers and symbols that to the untrained eye appeared to be an impenetrable wall. But Emily had spent years breaking down walls, though not the kind of walls people expected. Her mind, once sharp with the thrill of mathematical discovery, flickered with the memory of her younger self. Back when she had been Emily Wright, an associate professor of mathematics, respected and admired. She had once stood in the lecture halls, not as a janitor, but as an intellectual force, commanding the attention of students and colleagues alike. And then life had happened. Her husband, James, had fallen ill with a rare disease. The medical bills piled up, swallowing them whole, and her academic career crumbled as her responsibilities at home grew heavier. The dreams of a life spent solving complex problems faded as quickly as her confidence. When James died, leaving her with nothing but the memories of happier days, Emily had been forced to abandon her career in mathematics. A job as a janitor at Silverstone University was the only way she could keep her son, Charlie, in school. But that was then. This was now. Emily stood tall, her eyes narrowed on the screen. She could hear the whispers from the crowd, the jeers and mocking glances, but they didn't matter anymore. It was as though her entire life had been leading to this moment, where she could prove that despite her years of obscurity, she still had the brilliance that had once earned her a place among the greatest minds in academia. The equations on the screen began to shift in her mind, not as a tangled mess, but as something familiar, something that could be untangled with patience and precision. She could see the patterns, the interconnections. It wasn't an impossible task. It was just a different kind of challenge. She reached out, her hand steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. The chalk felt foreign in her hand, yet somehow it felt right. The first line she drew on the interactive board was smooth, confident, and as the crowd watched in disbelief, Emily began to break the problem apart. The crowd murmured in disbelief as she moved across the screen, her fingers tracing the complex shapes of numbers and symbols that had once seemed so far beyond her reach. The mocking laughter faded into a strange, uneasy silence. They had expected her to fail. They had expected a spectacle. But Emily wasn't performing for them. She was solving a puzzle. For the first time in years, Emily felt the familiar thrill of discovery. She wasn't a janitor anymore. She was the woman who could decode patterns, the mathematician who could untangle the chaos in front of her. But just as the first signs of understanding began to form, Victor Orlov's voice sliced through the silence. "You've only just started," he sneered, his arrogance dripping from every word. "Do you really think you can solve this? It's far beyond you. You can't even understand what you're looking at." Emily didn't flinch. She continued drawing, unfazed by his words. She knew better than to let him shake her resolve. This wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about proving to herself that she hadn't lost everything. The equations on the screen started to form a pattern, a sequence that led somewhere Emily hadn't been in years, but somewhere she knew she could reach. The crowd, initially dismissive, was now leaning forward, watching intently. Was this really happening? Was a janitor solving the impossible problem that no one else could? Victor Orlov stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Enough," he said, his voice louder now. This is nonsense. You're wasting everyone's time." But Emily wasn't listening to him anymore. She was lost in the problem, her mind working faster than it ever had before. She could feel it. The solution was just within her reach. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment she allowed herself to hope. Hope that she was more than the sum of her failures. Hope that she could rise above everything she had lost. And then, with a final flourish, she completed the proof. The room fell silent. Emily stood back, her breath coming in short gasps, her heart racing. The proof was complete. But as the final line was drawn, she turned her gaze to Victor, who was now staring at the screen in stunned disbelief. The audience, unsure of what to make of it all, began to murmur. Emily wiped her sweaty palms on her uniform and took a deep breath. She had done it. She had proven that a janitor could be more than a janitor. But the real question was, would Victor Orlov admit it? Clara stood before the massive screen, her heart hammering in her chest. The equations sprawled before her like an insurmountable mountain, each number and symbol twisting in an intricate web that seemed designed to mock her. She had spent the last decade of her life cleaning floors, yet here she was, asked to solve something no one in this room had cracked. How could she possibly succeed where the brightest minds had failed? Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the stylus. The familiar weight of it in her hand should have been comforting, but now it felt like a lifeline in a storm. She glanced around the room, the eyes of the professors, donors, and wealthy elites burning into her. The pressure was suffocating. Nakamura stood off to the side, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips. His confidence was palpable, his stance one of absolute certainty. He didn't even seem to be paying attention anymore. He had already written her off, assuming the whole charade would end in humiliation. He had no idea the battle that was unfolding in Clara's mind. The room's collective amusement began to fade as they realized Clara wasn't rushing to fail. The laughter that had echoed moments ago now fell into an uncomfortable murmur. A few guests muttered among themselves, clearly losing interest. They had expected Clara to stumble, to falter, to make a fool of herself, but instead she stood tall, poised and unfazed by their mockery. Clara, though, wasn't focused on the crowd anymore. She was lost in her thoughts, reflecting on the years that had led her to this moment. The pain of her past tugged at the edges of her consciousness, threatening to pull her under. I was once more than this, she thought. Once I was a mathematician, a researcher, a professor. Her mind drifted to the days when she was known as Clara Wright, a respected academic with a promising future. She remembered the sharp thrill of solving complex problems, the joy of discovering hidden patterns in the fabric of numbers. She had written groundbreaking papers on prime number theory, her work cited by the most prestigious journals. She had been a rising star in the field until her world came crashing down. Her husband David had fallen ill. The disease took him quickly, robbing her of both her partner and her financial stability. The medical bills piled up, and though Clara sought work, no university would take her on. Her credentials meant nothing when faced with years of debt and a child to raise. The promising career she had once enjoyed was a distant memory, replaced by long hours of scrubbing floors and empty spaces at the kitchen table. But she had promised David that she would never give up, not for her, and certainly not for their son Charlie. The fire that had once driven her to be a leader in academia hadn't died. It had only been buried beneath layers of fear, grief, and self-doubt. And now, as she stood before the equations on the screen, she could feel that fire flickering again, reigniting inside her. Maybe there's a pattern here too, Clara thought, remembering her grandfather's lessons. Her grandfather, Harold Wright, had been a cryptographer during the Cold War. He was a quiet man, a genius in his own right, who had spent his life decoding the world's most difficult secrets. As a child, Clara had spent countless hours with him, watching as he meticulously crafted solutions to puzzles others had deemed unsolvable. Every problem has a shape, he would tell her. If you can see the shape, you can solve the problem. It was a lesson Clara had carried with her, even after his death. Perhaps, just perhaps, it could help her now. With renewed resolve, she lifted the stylus and began to draw. The audience, at first unsure of what to make of her, began to murmur again. Clara's hand moved with precision, sketching out geometric shapes. First a simple hexagon, then a circle, interlocking them in a way that seemed, at least to her, meaningful. A few of the guests exchanged puzzled glances. Clara ignored them. She'd seen this before. The shapes, the numbers, the connections, they were all part of something greater, something she could understand if she looked hard enough. And as she moved across the screen, her confidence grew. The shapes began to take form, creating a pattern that hadn't been there before. What had once looked like chaos now appeared to have structure. The audience's laughter faltered as Clara's framework began to come together. Some of the professors started to lean in, squinting at the screen, their interest piqued. What was she doing? They had never seen anything like this approach before. Is she mapping the problem onto geometry? One of the professors whispered to a colleague. Nakamura, watching from the sidelines, narrowed his eyes. What is she doing? He muttered under his breath. His once confident smirk began to waver as Clara continued to add layer after layer to her lattice of shapes. This was not the embarrassing failure he had expected. He had assumed that the janitor would stumble, write meaningless scribbles, and provide a spectacle for his entertainment. Instead, Clara was doing something he hadn't anticipated. She was making sense of the equations in a way no one in this room had ever considered. Still, Nakamura wasn't about to let Clara's moment of brilliance escape his grasp. He pushed through the crowd, stepping forward to take center stage. His voice was louder now, trying to reassert his dominance. "This is absurd," he sneered. "Do you really think you're doing something important? This isn't mathematics. You're playing with shapes like a child." Clara didn't flinch. She knew the game Nakamura was playing. He had already made up his mind that she would fail. The question was no longer about him. It was about her and what she would allow herself to become. With a deep breath, Clara continued. She began to write equations between the shapes, her fingers dancing across the screen, the symbols falling into place with each stroke. The crowd began to fall silent, the earlier whispers turning into murmurs of confusion. What was she doing? Could she really be solving this? As Clara's lattice of geometric shapes grew more intricate, she felt a surge of recognition. The problem was not a fortress to be scaled. It was a puzzle to be reassembled, and Clara was the one who could unlock it. The beauty of the problem unfolded before her, the elegance of it making her pulse race. This was the work she had been born to do. But just as Clara was beginning to feel the first whispers of victory, the room's lights flickered. For a split second, everything went dark. The crowd gasped. Clara froze, her fingers hovering over the screen. Her heart pounded in her chest. It felt like the world had shifted beneath her feet. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, wondering if this was the end. Would the power outage be her undoing? The lights flickered back to life, but the moment of uncertainty hung in the air. Clara felt her confidence slip just for a moment before she regained control. She had come this far, and she wouldn't let a small setback end her challenge. She continued, her hand steady, even as the crowd waited, holding their collective breath. Would this interruption be her downfall? Or would Clara find the strength to finish what she had started? Clara's hand moved with renewed determination, her fingers tracing the lines of logic and geometry she had come to understand in a way that no one else in the room had even begun to grasp. The brief power surge had disrupted her concentration, but it didn't break her. She was no longer the janitor in a room full of intellectual giants. She was a mathematician once more, connecting the dots with precision and grace. The equations, once a foreign jumble of symbols, were now beginning to reveal their hidden truths. She filled the gaps in her latticework with equations that seemed to emerge from nowhere, from the same place she had once pulled answers from as a young professor. She wasn't just drawing shapes anymore, she was cracking the problem, unraveling the mystery that had confounded even the best minds. Clara felt the weight of the crowd's eyes upon her, but she refused to let it distract her. Their disbelief, their ridicule, it didn't matter. This was her moment to prove that she was still capable, still worthy of the name Clara Wright. She wasn't going to let Nakamura or anyone else define her worth. Across the room, Victor Orloff was no longer smirking. His posture had shifted, his arms no longer crossed in arrogance. Instead, he was watching Clara with a mixture of discomfort and disbelief. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to push forward, to fight through the ridicule and uncertainty. The room was split between silence and quiet murmurs. Some professors were still unsure of what was happening. They exchanged confused glances, their eyes flicking between the equations on the screen, and Clara trying to make sense of the impossible. Others, however, were starting to watch with growing interest. Could it be? Was this janitor, this woman they had all dismissed, actually solving the problem? Nakamura's eyes narrowed, his composure faltering for the first time since he had made the challenge. He had been so sure of his victory. His smug expression twisted into something less confident, less certain. The crowd could feel it. The tension in the air was palpable. Clara paused for a moment, her hand resting on the stylus as she took in the geometry on the screen before her. She took a deep breath, her mind clearing. It was time for the final stroke. With one decisive movement, she completed the last part of the equation, her fingers gliding across the screen with a newfound energy. The latticework of shapes, hexagons, circles, interlocking lines, came together in a way that no one in the room had anticipated. The final piece clicked into place. The conjecture was solved. For a moment, the room was still. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector, casting Clara's work on the massive screen for everyone to see. The crowd, once full of derisive laughter, now sat in stunned silence. No one could deny what they had just witnessed. Clara stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She had done it. She had solved the impossible. A janitor, a woman who had been invisible to them all, had just cracked a problem that no one had been able to solve. Nakamura, who had been so certain of his control, was now visibly shaken. He stepped forward, his expression hardening, as if trying to regain some semblance of dominance. "This is nonsense," he snapped, his voice harsh. "You've done nothing more than draw some random shapes. This is not mathematics. You've wasted everyone's time." Clara didn't flinch. She had heard that before. She had been told for years that her talents didn't matter, that she was nothing more than the janitor. But here, in this moment, with her proof displayed before them all, her silence spoke louder than any words she could have said. Before Nakamura could continue his tirade, her voice broke through the tension. "That is not nonsense." Professor Williams, a respected figure in the academic community, spoke up. His voice was steady and firm, carrying across the room. "What she has done is not only valid, it's revolutionary." The room erupted into a chorus of murmurs. Some professors nodded, their skepticism replaced by awe. Others were still in shock, trying to reconcile the woman they had ignored with the brilliance they had just witnessed. The applause started slowly, a hesitant clap here and there, but soon it grew into a full round of applause as the crowd recognized the magnitude of what Clara had done. Clara, though, remained composed. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need their recognition. What mattered was that she had proven something far more important to herself. She had shown them all that she wasn't just the woman they saw. She was more than her uniform, more than the years she had spent cleaning floors. She was Clara Wright, a mathematician, and no one could take that away from her. But Nakamura wasn't done. His face flushed with anger, his arrogance stung by the undeniable truth that Clara had bested him in front of his entire audience. His jaw tightened as he turned toward her, trying to regain control of the situation. "You've stolen this from somewhere," Nakamura sneered. "This solution, this lattice, I've seen it before. You didn't come up with this on your own. You've taken this from my company's research archives. This is nothing more than plagiarism." The room froze. The applause died instantly, replaced by an eerie silence. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Nakamura's words were sharp and full of venom, designed to destroy everything she had just achieved. "I did not steal this," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the rush of panic she felt inside. She had worked for this moment for too long to let it slip away now. She had done the work. She had solved the problem. "This is my work. It's my solution." Nakamura turned to the crowd, his expression one of smug triumph. "This woman has no credentials. She has no training. She is nothing but a janitor, someone who has no business solving a problem like this. You all saw it. She's taken what was mine and dressed it up as her own. A fraud." The room was divided. Some professors looked away, uncomfortable. Others began to murmur among themselves, unsure of who to believe. It was Nakamura's word against Clara's. The tension was unbearable. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had nothing to hide. She had earned this moment, and she wouldn't let Nakamura tear it down with his lies. Could Nakamura destroy her, or would she finally be free of his cruelty? Clara stood there still, her gaze fixed on the screen that displayed the equations she had so meticulously solved. The room, once filled with disbelief and mocking laughter, was now filled with a stunned silence. The weight of her achievement settled in the air like a dense fog. The crowd, slowly but surely, began to stir. It started with a hesitant clap, a single hand followed by another, and then a chorus of applause broke out, echoing through the grand hall. The sound was not the hollow mockery of moments before, but genuine awe. Clara's proof was undeniable. Though the applause was initially timid, as if unsure of what to make of this impossible moment, it quickly grew in strength. The guests, who had laughed at her earlier, now stared in amazement. Even the professors, those who had once dismissed her as nothing more than a janitor, were slowly coming to terms with the fact that she had just solved the very problem they themselves had failed to crack. Nakamura stood to the side, his arms crossed tightly in front of him, his face tight with frustration. He had expected the crowd's applause to be for him, for his genius, for his carefully curated challenge. But now, as Clara's brilliance began to sink in, the applause was for her, and Nakamura's power over the room slipped away. He was no longer the center of attention. He was isolated. Professor Williams, who had been silently watching Clara's progress from the back of the room, now made his move. He stepped forward with quiet dignity, the weight of his authority grounding the moment. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and firm. "This is not nonsense," he said, his words cutting through the murmur of the crowd. What Clara has done is revolutionary. Her approach, this geometric solution, it's not only valid, it's a breakthrough. This is the future of mathematics. The room, still buzzing with disbelief, fell silent once again. Professor Williams's endorsement was not just a seal of approval, it was a statement of recognition, one that would carry far more weight than Nakamura's baseless accusations ever could. His words seemed to put an end to the growing uncertainty, and the applause that followed was now full-throated and sincere. Clara felt a wave of emotions wash over her, the recognition she had craved for so long, the validation she had feared she would never receive, and the quiet triumph of finally proving to herself that she was still the mathematician she once was. For years, she had been relegated to the shadows, cleaning floors, taking orders, never seen for what she truly was. But now the world was seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. And yet, even in this moment of victory, Clara knew there was more to her journey. As the applause continued, Clara reflected on the years of hardship that had brought her here. She thought about the time when she was Emily Wright, a promising mathematician, respected by her peers, invited to conferences, honored by her students. Then came the tragedy, the illness that had taken her husband's life, the spiraling debts, the loss of everything she had worked for so long. She had let the world see her as a janitor, as invisible. She had accepted the labels others had given her, the role that society had cast her in. But today, she had reclaimed herself. The fire that had once burned so brightly within her had never truly gone out. It had just been buried beneath the weight of years of silence and neglect. But Clara had found it again, found that spark of brilliance. And now the world had seen it for themselves. Her heart still raced with the thrill of her triumph. But there was also a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had proven not just her intellect, but her worth. She was no longer invisible. Her gaze flickered toward the crowd once more, her eyes scanning the faces now staring at her with admiration and awe. And then her gaze landed on Nakamura, whose face had twisted into something less confident, less certain than it had been at the start. The man who had mocked her, who had expected her to fail, was now reeling from the realization that the woman he had dismissed had just bested him in front of the very crowd he had hoped to impress. As the final round of applause faded, Clara stood still rooted to the spot. She had accomplished something monumental, but in the back of her mind, she knew that the battle was not yet over. Nakamura, in all his arrogance, was not the type to accept defeat easily. Clara's mind wandered briefly to her son, Charlie. She had done this for him, for the chance to build a future for them both, one that was no longer defined by scraping by. But now she wondered how he would see her, how he would look at her once he realized that his mother had proven herself in front of the world. Would he be proud of her? Would he see her as the hero she was? Her reflection was interrupted by a voice that pulled her back into the present. It was Richard Evans, a corporate CEO and trustee of the university, who had quietly been observing the entire scene from the back. As the applause began to fade, Richard stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. The room went still as he approached Clara, his expression serious. "Clara," he began, his voice warm but firm, "what you've done today is nothing short of extraordinary." She looked up, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Richard's gaze was fixed on her, and for a moment, the weight of the room's attention seemed to shift away from Nakamura and toward her once again. "I represent a foundation dedicated to supporting gifted minds in all fields," Richard continued. "Mathematics, research, it's a passion of mine, and today I've seen something truly remarkable. If you're willing, I would like to offer you funding for your future research, a chance to continue your work, whatever you need. No strings attached." The room seemed to hold its breath again. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had not expected this, not in a million years. A corporate CEO offering to fund her research. A chance to rebuild her career from the ground up. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was nod slowly, the weight of the offer sinking in. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Richard smiled. "You've earned it. Don't waste it. As he turned to leave, Nakamura's presence loomed at the edge of the room, but his influence seemed insignificant now. Clara had won. She had proven herself, not just to the world, but to herself. Meanwhile, Nakamura stood at the back of the room, his pride crumbling before his eyes. He had no power here anymore. His attempts to belittle Clara had only exposed his own arrogance and insecurity. His empire, built on dominance and control, had been shattered by a woman he had dismissed as a mere janitor. As he glanced around the room, he saw the faces of those who had once idolized him, now shifting their gaze to Clara. The truth had been revealed, and there was no denying it. Nakamura's moment of glory had turned into one of defeat. He turned and walked away from the crowd, disappearing into the shadows of his own making. Clara stood alone, the echoes of the applause still ringing in her ears. The spotlight had long since dimmed, but its warmth lingered on her skin, a stark contrast to the cold that had settled deep within her for years. She had won. More than the $500 million, more than the recognition from her peers, this moment was hers, and it was something no one could take away. Nakamura had already retreated into the shadows, his presence no longer commanding the room. His pride, once so towering, had been shattered in front of everyone. The power he wielded through wealth and status had crumbled beneath the quiet strength of a janitor, a woman who had never once allowed herself to be defined by her circumstances. Clara's fingers brushed the check that Nakamura had reluctantly handed her, $500 million. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was a chance to reclaim what had been taken from her, a chance to rewrite her story. But even as she held the check, her thoughts were already moving forward. She had already gained something far more valuable, her dignity. She had proven herself not only to the world, but to herself. She wasn't the invisible woman she had once been. She was someone who had fought against every expectation, against every obstacle, and had come out victorious. She was more than a janitor. She was Clara Wright, mathematician, researcher, and now a symbol of resilience and intellect. Her journey wasn't just about solving equations. It was about reclaiming her place in the world. It was about showing the world that no one should ever be underestimated, no matter how invisible they may seem. In the days following the event, Clara's life took on a new rhythm. Richard Evans, the corporate CEO who had offered her funding, wasted no time in following through on his promise. Clara was granted the resources to pursue her research, to build the career she had lost all those years ago. No longer would she clean floors or serve as an unnoticed background figure. She was now a person of significance again. Richard's foundation had offered Clara more than just financial support. They had offered her an opportunity to rebuild her life. No strings attached, just the chance to take the academic world by storm once more. Clara began to plan her next steps with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The past was behind her, but it had shaped her into the woman she was now, the woman who was capable of anything she set her mind to. Her first order of business was reclaiming her place in the world of mathematics. Clara began working on new projects, ones that would challenge the very foundation of number theory, the field she had once so loved. Her mind, once clouded with doubt and fear, was now free to explore ideas she had abandoned. She had always been driven by a sense of wonder for the unknown, and now she was reclaiming that sense of curiosity and awe. But the work wasn't just for her. Clara had experienced the darkness of invisibility, and now she wanted to shine a light for others who felt overlooked. She wanted to show others, particularly those who had been marginalized, that their worth was not defined by their current circumstances. Just as she had risen, so could they. Her new purpose was to inspire, to teach, to uplift those who had been told they couldn't. She had been there once, silenced by the weight of societal expectations. But now she would be a voice for the voiceless. Meanwhile, Victor Nakamura's world had begun to unravel. His empire, once built on manipulation and arrogance, was now shaken. The board members of his corporation, who had once blindly followed his every command, were now questioning his leadership. News of his public humiliation at the university had spread like wildfire, eroding the foundation of his power. Nakamura had attempted to salvage what was left of his reputation, but it was too late. His credibility had been destroyed by the very woman he had dismissed as unworthy. The corporate world he had dominated was no longer in his grasp. People who had once looked up to him now turned their backs, unable to ignore the truth that had been revealed. It wasn't just his business that had crumbled. Nakamura's arrogance had cost him his dignity, something no amount of wealth could buy back. He had tried to crush Clara's spirit, but in doing so, he had exposed his own vulnerability. As Clara's career soared, Nakamura's once glittering world turned to dust. His fall from grace was slow and painful, but it was inevitable. Clara took a deep breath as she sat at her new desk in the university's research wing, the sun streaming in through the window. Her computer screen was filled with equations, but now they were hers to solve. The excitement of discovery pulsed in her veins. For the first time in years, Clara felt the thrill of a problem waiting to be unraveled, a mystery to be solved. She had returned to her true calling, and nothing would stand in her way. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up to find a message from Charlie, her son. "I'm so proud of you." "Mom, you showed them." A smile tugged at Clara's lips. She had done it. She had not only shown the world what she was capable of, but she had also shown her son the power of perseverance and resilience. She had proved to him and to herself that nothing, not even the darkest of days, could define her. As Clara looked out of the window, she realized that this was only the beginning. The future stretched out before her, wide and full of possibility. She was no longer the woman who had been forced to clean floors in silence. She was the woman who had defied the odds, who had risen above her circumstances, and who had reclaimed her place in the world of ideas. Her story was a reminder to everyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Never give up. Your brilliance is yours, and no one can take that away from you. Clara had proven that even in the darkest of times, the light of determination could shine through.